Ben. How are you?
All right. How are you today?
I'm so great. I'm curious about you and how you started and got interested in sustainability in the first place.
I've always been very drawn to nature. My dad would take me hiking a lot when I was a kid, and I take my kids hiking now. And I have a very distinct memory of there used to be this tree we'd always stop under on our hike. Yeah, I grew up in San Fernando Valley, so it's super, super hot, right? And it was this big oak tree, and we would have a snack and stop on our hike. And then I loved that spot, and I had a really good memory of being there with my dad. And then we went back one time, and the whole area had been bulldozed for development. The tree was gone and that area didn't exist anymore. And that had a really profound impact on me as a kid. And I wrote my whole essay for business school, my entrance exam, about businesses that made the world a better place because their business model was designed that way, which should now be sort of like a social impact business or VC. That didn't really exist at the time. And so I think, for me, I've always kind of been drawn to that. And I've had, the amazing opportunity to work on some great projects that, prior to my work here and including my work here, where you take a shot at doing things and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And you apply for a grant to do something that's going to be great. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And when it does work, it can be amazing, like this Boyle Heights mural. And it's going to be different. It's always going to be different than you thought it was, but sometimes in a really good way and sometimes in a bad way. And you have to kind of accept both sides. To me, this is kind of what I've dedicated my whole career and life to. I grew up here in LA, and I think LA has the opportunity to solve a lot of these issues that the world experiences because we are so diverse, because we experience water scarcity and air quality issues and energy issues. But we also have a ton of capital, and we have media, and we have the largest port in the country and the largest manufacturing base. And we have all these things. We're kind of a microcosm of the world. And so I think if we can create some of the solutions here, we have the opportunity to solve those for some of the rest of the world.
A lot of our readership is definitely familiar with LEED certification, which I know is very important for the US Green Builders Council. Are there other third-party certifications that we should be looking at or weighing equally?
I'm the executive director for the US Green Building Council Los Angeles. We are an independent nonprofit, so we're independent from the USGBC that runs the LEED credential certification. I just want to make sure I make that distinction. There's no question that LEED is the leading, no pun intended, green building rating in the world, and will continue to be so. I don't think that's going to change. I think that there's no cookie cutter sort of solution for everyone, and there's definitely different certifications that address health in different ways. You may have heard of WELL, which is a rating, it's primarily used by office buildings and corporate campuses, but is now expanding to homes. Fitwell is also sort of similar in its framing. I think everyone sort of struggled, to be honest with you, to figure out how to engage both multifamily and single family homes. In the multifamily world, there's split incentives between owners and tenants, and very few owners and managers, I think, are willing to invest the time, energy, and effort to go through a healthy building certification, even a LEED certification, without having really strong tenant engagement, without having a direct line to very directly how that's going to increase rents, even though we have lots of data that it does increase rents, being able to tie that very directly to that. So I think that's a bit of a challenge there, and I think that's getting better. I think in the single family home environment, sort of the same thing. People want to know, how's this going to translate to, a higher purchase price, right, on point of sale.
You just finished the Green Building Expo here in LA, and I wanted to know what your takeaway was from the day. What did you learn? What were some of the big themes?
I was excited because we were, at the Beehive in South LA, and we were in in the heart of a community of need that we want to be engaging with. We were in a converted and repurposed industrial building that was used for office, that had the native plants and had the natural light and all the kind of things that we talk about in the green building world. And so we were kind of living that experience, right, while we were there. And so that was great. And I always, to me, it's always important to have art and music. And, remember, at the end of the day, we're all people, just trying to improve our experience in life and just in general. That's the importance of the work we do. And so I feel like the whole event kind of had that feeling, and the energy was high and the conversations were great. And I'm a big believer that there's a place at the table for everyone. I had a woman come up to me at this event last week, and she pulled me aside. She said, "Hey, I'm 56. I want to come and check out this event because I just don't want to do work anymore where I'm not contributing to trying to make the world a better place. But I'm not sure if it's too late for me. Am I too old? Is there a place for me? And I was like, absolutely, there's a place for you. There's a seat for everyone at the table, and those kind of little moments I think are really important because any one person can make a big impact. I believe that. We do have a Green Homes Committee that we launched last year to really create more engagement and awareness around the space. And so there's a bunch of realtors who are really leading that committee, which is great. Right?
Realtors and interior designers seem to be very on board. But what about manufacturers, say of furniture or decor?
It's a great question. I think they're getting more on board. A lot of that's being driven by things such as EPDs or environmental product declarations that really require that there's basically a breakdown of the manufacturing process, the chemicals and materials that went into those products. That gives you a sense of kind of the environmental and carbon footprint of those products. And so we're starting to see requirements for state level for that for bigger projects. Smart architects and others are starting to incorporate that data as they do design. My hope is that we have increased transparency for people when they're just making their own purchasing decisions. There's that red label list and other things, products to avoid. But it all comes down to transparency, right? There's got to be sort of the carrot and the stick, and the carrot of being able to have increased sales and more market penetration because you are being transparent, and the stick of having some enforcement of people being required to at least have the transparency, right? I'm a big believer of like, let's educate people, let's provide transparency, and then people will make the right decisions. If we don't require that transparency, it's tough to push people in that right direction. Most of the time, the challenge when it comes to green buildings is that we hear all the time is that people try to bring sustainability into the process at too late of a point in the process. It's really important to think about, again, it comes back to intentionality. What are you trying to do with this, whether it's your home, whether it's a project you're working on, and incorporating that sustainability from the beginning. Because if it's things that you're looking at from a design standpoint or materials, a lot of times those things can be cost neutral if they're incorporated in the beginning. Or people starting to get into real cost, challenges when they're trying to come in at the, hey, we're working on building this project, and then we're almost done. How can we incorporate sustainability into this? And it's like, well, at that point, it's going to really change the mix and drive costs up. And then, I think materials is a great example. There's a whole movement right now around embodied carbon and the carbon footprint that goes into materials. We didn't really have the transparency just a few years ago that we have now. And most big companies, I thought it would take years and years for this stuff to catch on, but most big companies realize that just by paying attention to the carbon of the materials they were using, they can immediately cut about 15% of the carbon of their projects just by paying attention to it. And then if they want to go deeper than that, they might have to start making some trade-offs or looking at using things differently. And so there's different strategies that have to employ. But 15% of the embodied carbon of a project is a huge amount that they could just shave off the top by being aware of it. Cost is always going to be an issue. Honestly, I think a big thing that hurt the green building movement to begin with was we weren't leading with cost to begin with. We weren't leading with the return, and we were saying, oh, this is the right thing to do. Well, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But we've seen the data now that green buildings create healthier people that have higher productivity, less sick days, and those things lead to higher returns from their jobs. Those things lead to higher returns for their companies. The smart companies, the Googles and the others of the world, they're employing these green building practices and others because they're knowing it's actually making them more money. And we have great data now around lead projects and others that have higher rents and a higher chance of companies renewing their leases and all these other things where those things are about making more money. And I think that the real issue is that we have a flawed financial model we use when we look at even our homes or others that don't take into account physical and mental health, right? They don't take into account these other pieces that actually we do spend money on, right? But we don't look at it in a full picture financial framework.
What are some of the places where you see the most room for growth, the biggest opportunities in green building that are exciting you right now?
It's a great question also. I think, I mentioned embodied carbon, whereas I think that is happening much faster than we thought it would. And I think will continue to happen faster. And I think people really like having increased transparency around some of the things that we discussed around materials. We launched a native plant landscaping class a few years ago or 2 years ago that has done really well for gardeners and landscapers. And something like native plants to me is once you learn about it and you're like, oh, these plants basically remove the need for me to use pesticides, reduce the amount of water I need, reduce my fire risk, improve the biodiversity and support the native flora and fauna. Like, well, why wouldn't we do that? And it's just really because we didn't have the information. Our gardening community doesn't know how to support those kinds of plants and doesn't know they take longer to get established. And there's all these other pieces that you realize that we just need to shift the system a little bit. And I think people are embracing more of that now when they look at their homes and others, like, oh, we should be using native plants, and here's why. I think this move to nature-based solutions, this move to embodied carbon, no question, the move around electrification right now will continue. And, we have challenges there on a variety of levels in terms of policy and cost. But anything we can do to remove combustion, from our homes creates healthier spaces for us to live in and reduces the carbon load of our home environment. So I think those are the trends I would kind of point to. And the other thing I would say, we talk about resilience a lot, and this comes back to the hub on some level. The overlap between sustainability and resilience is significant. I think starting to think about how do we create like a distributed model of resilience, and it comes back to this again. We try to create this big industrial complex. Well, really, more distributed systems support this, whether it's distributed energy, distributed ag, distributed water. You pick what it is, creates more resilience in our society. And so I think just having this network of things that we can bring to our community that can make us more resilient in the event of disaster, thinking about how being more sustainable can actually create a more resilient home for myself, for my family, for my coworkers. I think those things are all connected, and I think that move will continue as well. From a government standpoint, I think government thinks so much about the stick and the regulation, but not enough about the carrot in terms of how can government help create more positive returns for more sustainable buildings or more sustainable investments? How can they create a professional database for people who are certified to do, less wildfire prone improvements for your home or your landscape? How can government create ways for our capitalistic marketplace to optimize and take advantage and support these things that help people, but also help make more money? And I think, yes, it's important to have the stick, it's important to have the policy updates and to push things, but you need to have both. And I don't think government thinks enough about sort of having both and how to support the private sector in the way they need to. From a business standpoint, I think obviously we've seen this big movement towards ESG, environmental social governance, and people making these commitments to being net zero by 2030 or 2040 or whatever it might be. And I think that's all good. I think starting to really communicate the nitty gritty of how they think they're going to get there and being honest about the challenges. I think companies say, hey, we made this commitment, but then they should be saying, so we made this commitment, but we don't know how we're going to do X. Help us figure out how to do it. And I think so often we try to pretend like we got everything under control and don't worry about it, where I think if we try to share with each other that we're on a collective journey more and that we're trying to move there together, can be a very positive, empowering thing. And so I think companies need to do that a little bit more. And then coming to the individual, I think it starts with awareness, it starts with intentionality. I also think being able to put yourself out there a little bit, right? I think everyone's always afraid of, someone's going to shame them because they're not doing X or Y, but we're all people, right? We all do what we have to get by, and we try to make the best decision we can for whatever the reality is of our lives. And I don't think we should shame people for those kinds of things. And I think that comes back to us creating ways where people can save money or make money being greener and being more sustainable. And so I think having that kindness and taking that time, whether it's the project we worked on in Boyle Heights or even some of the programs we have here, like our Green Building Corps, where we work with folks who are trying to get into sustainable careers. I've been amazed by what happens when you're just authentic with really connecting with people and engaging with them. And that's hard to do at scale. How it completely changes the conversation and relationship, and people are willing to sit down with you. If I could share about the Boyle Heights mural, can I share about that for a second?
That was going to be my next question.
My big learning from that project, and there's a variety of learnings, but we were talking to Carmelita and who runs the Boyle Heights Art Conservatory about doing a mural there. And I happened to have a conversation with someone at the Energy Foundation who was an old friend, and we were catching up, and I told him about this project. And I was like, yeah, we're even thinking about doing a mural. And he was like, oh, I grew up in Boyle Heights. And I was like, oh, and he was like, I might fund that. And I was like, oh, really? And sent him a proposal. He ended up leaving a month later, and I was so worried that they were actually going to honor that commitment. They ended up honoring it. And then, Boyle Heights Art Conservatory is such a great partner. And then they teach people about art, right, in media. But, we did our education, that we do education on climate change fundamentals for K through 12. And we did that with the Boyle Heights high school there. And then those kids really helped put together on their end ideas for the mural of what they saw as a more sustainable, cleaner version of their community, essentially. And then the muralists took those ideas. They took these papers. They had all these collection of papers, and Omar worked with them to teach them how to use these mineral-based paint to paint that. And these kids, there's about 12 people who worked on the mural, 3 muralists, and then about 9 of the high schoolers. They said like, oh, they didn't really understand what it meant to have a cleaner version of their community until they were actually forced to sit down and kind of think about it and actually have to draw it and create it. And that was really, to me, like an aha moment of like, oh, we talk all the time about sustainability and what it is, but we don't actually have a shared vision. Until we have a shared vision, we can't actually work towards something together because we can't see it. We don't know what that is. And for these kids that, I talked to them afterwards also, and they were like, they could see now what a cleaner Boyle Heights looks like. And it was like, oh, I want that. Like, let's work towards that. Like, once you have that experience, you don't kind of go back from that. But we're not providing ourselves the space to create that shared vision. And I think that's a big part of the challenge, right? And we need to focus on having that vision, then we'll get there much faster.
What advice would you give to a designer or a builder who is involved in a community project like that? Where do you start?
First of all, being willing to put yourself out there. We have a legacy project that we do every year where we put 20 grand into a community project. The Boyle Heights Arts Conservatory was one of them a couple of years ago, but we have, do one every year. There's a role for everyone to play. You just have to be willing to put in the time and put in the effort to be present. And whether it's picking up a shovel to dig a hole or helping out with the design of a lattice work structure that's going to hold ivy someplace, we've had people who've helped out in all these different ways. And so I think it's making a commitment to put in the time and realizing that you just being present is of value. Because I think people oftentimes like, well, I don't really have anything to add to that. I don't know what I'll do. Well, nobody knows what they're going to do to start out. And I think that's just an illusion we have where we feel like people are supposed to show up and have things under control and understood. And that just doesn't really happen. There's such a need, I think, for mentorship. Anybody can really be a mentor. It just means taking the time and space to talk with someone about their career. And it doesn't mean you have to be this incredibly accomplished person. And so we have a mentor program, and I'd say for architects, designers, other people, like, put yourself out there and being a mentor and helping someone and just having the conversation. Because if you just help that one person on their journey, that can have profound impacts in and of itself.
Who are some of those visionary companies or individuals, designers or builders whose work you really get excited about?
I come across people all the time who inspire us in the architecture and design world. Especially a lot of these big firms like the Perkins and Wills and the Arups and the other, doing amazing work. But I think it kind of gets lost in the shuffle of like these big corporate entities. And I meet these people all the time who are putting in 60, 70-hour weeks because they care. So I don't know if it's like one specific firm or whatnot, but I just think the green building community, to be honest with you, is spectacular community. That's why I chose to work here. I come across, every business community has its own culture. The green building community is unlike any other community I've ever found in terms of being very collaborative in nature, being very forward thinking. I've seen people compete with each other on a project, seen somebody win and then share with the other person what they did so they can all move forward. And you just don't see that in other industries, and everyone seems to be pretty nice people. So I specifically chose this world because I felt like the green building community was just such a great community to be part of, right? And to lead that, I felt like for me was an honor.
What is a dream project that you would love to see realized?
I want to create sort of like a net zero modular kind of home cabin community or something like that in the Sierras, where it's all powered off grid. It's got everything around waste and ag that it needs to be sort of self-sustaining. It's built with green materials. Like for me, I would love that to be kind of like something that I could help work on in the later years of my career, that I could spend time in and leave for my family. So that's kind of my, I don't know, it's kind of my dream for me. Yeah.
What is a little thing that everyone can do to start making a difference and living a little more green?
The first part is it starts with awareness and intentionality. I'm a big believer that, so much of this is us just trying to get back to nature, right? What we all came from originally. We sort of created this like version of our world that sort of like everything needed to scale and be driven by machines and driven by this industrial complex. And I think we've come to the realization that yes, that there's benefits and a place for that, but at the end of the day, that's probably not the best thing for us. It's not just about conserving resources, right? It's about how you engage with the environment around you and thinking about how it's impacting your own health. And that could be everything from taking a look at the chemicals you use to clean your home and thinking about, well, does this make sense? Is this good for my own health and breathing, to having your window open, to get fresh air and natural light, and how does that impact you? And then starting to think about how does that, how are you using water? How are you using energy? How are you creating waste? So I think all those things, it starts with that awareness, then everything kind of flows from there.